It's burning everywhere right now. In the rainforest, in the cedar forest, in the redwoods, in our German forest. In recent years, forest fires have increased worldwide due to drought and heat waves, particularly in Europe. Through deforestation and destruction of habitat, 10,000 tree species worldwide are threatened to become extinct. That is every sixth tree species on Earth. Tree species are therefore more endangered by the man-made climate and nature crisis than other plants and animal species, of which every 8 species is endangered today. This fact is really hard to understand because trees seem so robust to us. Each individual lives hundreds to 1,000 years, some even reach 10,000 years of age. The ancestors of the wooden trees evolved wood fiber over 300 million years ago. And wood makes trees very big and old because the wind cannot easily bend them and because very few animals can eat wood. There are some insects, like the bark beetle, and otherwise mainly fungi. Wooden trees over 150 million years ago built incredibly dense forests on land on the supercontinent Pangaea, which was positioned at the equator at that time. The primeval forest stored an enormous amount of carbon in the soil, eventually forming coal. Today, coal is still the second most important source of energy for mankind. But if we continue to use this coal, this extract of the former primeval forest, if we turn all back to CO2, and then we will heat the Earth well over 4 degrees on average, with terrible consequences for people and forests and eventually all life on Earth. As humans, we cannot eat wood, but we have been using wood for weapons and clothing, as building and heating materials since we were around. And the forests give us even more than this direct benefit, but we don't thank them for that. Forests stabilize the local climate and the water balance. They provide shade, shelter from rain and wind, they store CO2 and produce oxygen. They provide habitat and food for a huge variety of animals, plants, and microorganisms. Therefore, people have always liked to build their settlements near forests. During the last few million years, in the changing warm and cold periods of Earth, forests were repeatedly pushed back by glacier masses. But after the last ice age, over 10,000 years ago, a very mild, stable climate was evolving that was favorable for forests and people. Yet through the rapidly growing settlements and then cities, a struggle, a clash between forests and humans developed, which was reported in the oldest writings, such as the Gilgamesh epic, the Greek myths, the Old Testament, and the Edda. Disrespecting their storyline of hubris and nemesis, we still think we'd be winners if we push back the wild forest, if we slash, cultivate, and burn it. After the Industrial Revolution, only 50% of Earth's forest cover remained, and today it is only about 30%. More areas are currently being deforested than grown, and if so, mostly through unsustainable forestry. Half of our forests today are managed, and the really old wild forests, which can store the most CO2, which give habitat to the most diverse species, they make up less than 15% of the Earth's surface. In addition to deforestation, climate change is now increasingly the enemy of the forest. So our forest is really not doing well. In Germany, a third of our landscape is still covered with forest, but this is mostly young forest, monocultures. The most common tree species in Germany, the conifers, spruce and pine, the deciduous trees, beech and oak, they really have a hard time. The droughts of recent years has led to the premature fall of the leaves and the clearing of the crowns. In the case of the spruce, mild winters favor the mass reproduction of bark beetles. The dying of trees is thus increasing. And every tree we lose worsens our carbon footprint. We use so much fossil fuel per year and person that each one of us would have to nurture 1,000 adult trees in order to neutralize one's CO2 emissions. It is really time that we should protect and honor the wild forest.
hemlock, grand fir, yellow cedar, Douglas fir. The canopy is a colander stippling the beetle-swarmed surfaces with specks of sun. For every large trunk, a few hundred seedlings huddle on the litter. Sword fern, liverworts, lichen, and leaves as small as sand grains stain every inch of the dank downed logs. The mosses are themselves as dense as thumbnail forests. A bit of bushwhacking reveals the extent of the prodigious rot. Crumbling, creature-riddled bolts decaying for centuries. Snags, gothic and twisted, silvery as inverted icicles. A fecund putrefaction. The sheer mass of ever-dying life packed into each single cubic foot. Woven together with fungal filaments and dew-betrayed spiderweb leaves you woozy. Mushrooms ladder up the sides of trunks in terraced ledges. Dead salmon feed the tree. Soaked by fog all winter long, spongy green stuff that can't be named covers every wooden pillar in thick bays. Death is everywhere, oppressive and beautiful. Our kind will always dread these close choked thickets, where the beauty of solo trees gives way to something masked, scary, and crazed. There are things in here worse than wolves and witches. Primal fears that no amount of civilizing will ever tame. The trunk of an immense western red cedar. It reeks of incense. The top has sheared off, replaced by a candelabra of branches, promoted to stand-in trunks. A grotto opens at ground level in the rotted hardwood. Whole families of mammals could live inside it. But the branches, 1,000 years on, drooping with scaly sprays, a dozen stories high, are still crammed full of cones. Long life maker, thank you for the baskets and the boxes. Thank you for the cradles, the beds, canoes, paddles, poles, logs, posts, the rot-proof shakes and shingles, the kindling that will always light. Thank you for the tools, the chests, the decking, the clothes closets, the paneling. I forgot. Thank you for all these gifts that you have given. We're sorry. We didn't know how hard it is for you to grow back.
Hello, my name is Meiting Shi. I'm very happy to be here today. Actually, I'm a kindergarten teacher in Kreuzberg, and this is not an easy job. Seven years ago, love brought me here to Germany. Originally, I come from China, from Anyi, that is in the province Jiangxi. Close to my hometown, there's a little village, Liuzhen. It has a tree which is 1,000 years old. The trunk has a width of almost 4 meters. The people there say, if you walk around the tree for 10 times, then you can make a wish. Last time, when I was there, I did so. But what I wished for, I will not tell you. Chinese people love trees and meadows, so there are a lot of points on stories about them. Some time ago, I read a book, The King of Trees by Archen. In this book, there is a big forest which is burned down. The trees are burning and flying in the air and falling back onto the earth. The people, they are running to the scene, watching the flames. They see animals, a deer, which is in panic and jumps around between the flames. This story made me very sad. Every time when I'm sad, I will sing. There's a lied which has touched me a lot. It's about searching a tree. Don't ask me where I come from. My homeland is far. Why do I wander around? Because of the birds in the sky, because of the stream that flows through the valley, and because of the endless meadows. That's why I wander around. And also because of the tree I have seen in my dreams.
everything is interconnected. This sentence by Alexander von Humboldt is one of the first sentences that allows us to get the Earth system as a fully interconnected system. So Alexander von Humboldt was one of the first who managed to describe the Earth as an interconnected system with humanity and nature being part of the very same system. Today, when we discuss the Earth system, we talk about different spheres. The atmosphere, the biosphere, the hydrosphere, and then we could consider humanity as part of the biosphere, but we can also say, no, it's the anthroposphere. We might even, since the Industrial Revolution, talk about the technosphere, which is shaping part of the Earth system. There has been an effort with the United Nations to set up 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Those are reflecting these subsystems. And following those 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations would allow us to navigate through the 21st century, hopefully making the world a better world. 2 of those Sustainable Development Goals refer to life on Earth and to climate action. Those 2 are also reflected in what is called the global planetary boundaries. This set of 9 boundaries are subsystems where if humanity steps over the limits, we might endanger the way we are living on the planet. We have been living on the planet for the last thousands of years. So whether it's climate change or biodiversity integrity, those 2 which are reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals, whether one of these is more endangered than the other, it doesn't really matter. Because all of those subsystems, atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, technosphere, they are interconnected in a complex and non-linear way. And its single compartments are interconnected to other compartments in the other subsystems. So there is no way how humanity could survive without forests. And it is clear that as long as there are humans on Earth, we will make use of the forest. So what is the role of forests then, for example, for the question of climate stability? Forests are the major stock of carbon on Earth, in the terrestrial part of the Earth at the least. Maybe it's also the soils. But if you clear the forest, what follows is the degradation of soils. So after losing the carbon stock of the forest, you will lose the carbon stock of the soils just as well. At least this is for major parts of the Earth, the story that would evolve. So taking care for the forests on Earth is part of taking care for the global planetary boundaries, and it's also an integral part of taking into account the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. How could we care about forests? Obviously, those primary forests that we are still having, we should try to keep them. We should have as much natural conservation as possible, because this is where the hotspots are of biodiversity. That's where the most species are found and where we need to protect them. On the other hand, we can use forests. There is actually not a single scenario that is not using biomass as a possibility to counteract for the carbon dioxide emissions in the 21st century if we would want to stay below those 1.5 degrees of global warming as has been negotiated in the Paris Agreement. If we want to do this, we need biomass, we need trees, we need the forest to capture carbon back from the atmosphere and to help us bring atmospheric levels to something that allows us for a decent climate path into the 22nd century. How can we do this? We could actually cut trees after planting them and having them grown for a longer period, and then take the wood and put it underneath somewhere in some old mines, so that the carbon is put aside, stored aside, just as we have been doing over millions of years with the forests that have been at that time in geological periods. Or, and I think this is much more efficient, we could take this wood and build houses from it. We can even think about wooden houses in the metropolitan areas of industrialized countries. Why not? We would save a lot of cement. And the concrete is one of the major factors for the emission of carbon dioxide. So trying to substitute concrete with wood is a very efficient way, actually, to use the managed forest not as a resource just for burning, but as a building material. By this, we would get a better balance of the carbon dioxide stocks between the biosphere, the atmosphere, and the anthroposphere. So maybe take this with you as a possibility to keep the planetary boundaries as a concept, making your way through the Sustainable Development Goals, preserving the pristine natural forests that there are in those parts of the world where they still exist, and using forests on managed land to make the best out of it for a common future.
As you probably know, people have always tried to make sense of the creation of the world, of its structure, and of its end. The result is a multitude of perspectives, many different explanations of the world, which have a lot in common. For example, the fabric of infinity, creation, and the end of the world, also called the apocalypse, form the temporal framework of our existence. There is also a moral framework, good and evil, below and above, heaven and hell, God and devil. They are in conflict, fighting for supremacy. The terrible consequences can be seen in the history of mankind. The Nordic people suggested a particularly interesting explanation. It is found in the Edda, written in the 13th century. The gods once planted a world tree, a huge ash tree called Yggdrasil, which when fully grown, makes up the whole cosmos. A tree is a fractal being. It follows the geometry of self-similarity. The trunk develops itself into strong branches. These branches develop into thinner branches, and in turn to thick twigs, which reach out into thin twigs and to the leaves. The same fractal principle is used to construct the roots, which are a kind of underground crown. Numerous animals are living in the world tree. For example, 4 deer in the crown. Also, a clever, nameless, but unfortunately broken-winged eagle, between whose eyes a hawk is sitting. which occasionally flies out to provide the eagle with new visions. Under the ground, a dragon called Nidhuggur bites and claws at the roots of the ash tree. It also poisons the groundwater from which the world tree draws its strength. One is led to understand that the eagle is the principle of good. The dragon is the principle of evil. Between these two powers, a squirrel hurries back and forth across the trunk. Raddatz, drill tooth, delivers eagle's insults and threats to the dragon, and upon return, brings the dragon's slander back to the eagle. Meanwhile, for the ash tree, things are getting worse and worse. How much longer will it be able to stand there? They say the trembling of the tribe heralds the end of the world. One day, the tree may fall in a mighty storm and bury everything beneath itself. For Yggdrasil, the world tree, certain life forms are much more dangerous than others, such as the bark beetles, which excavate their tunnels everywhere between the bark and the trunk. The bark beetle lives in all possible places of the trunk, below, in the middle, above. It doesn't know the difference between good and evil. It has almost no horizon because it can only just see as far as the next chamber. It's a good place to live between tree and bark, a real comfort zone. The single bark beetle is completely harmless in itself. It is dangerous only when it appears by the thousands. The fallen tree offers a solid basis to life for quite some time. Even in a flood, even at the end of the world.